I'm Andrea, a passionate DEI advocate and consultant on a mission. Join me in each episode as we celebrate diversity, ignite conversations, and craft workplaces and educational institutions where everyone thrives. This podcast is my commitment to making a meaningful impact on the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So are you ready? Let's get Diversifused. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Get Diversifused podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Horton-Mericli, founder of Diversifuse Consulting and a passionate DEI advocate and ally. In today's episode, we will discuss embracing building authentic connections, inclusion, belonging, and courageous leadership with our guest speaker, Elena Armijo. Elena is a master certified coach, founder and CEO of the C-Suite Collective, and a certified Dare to Lead facilitator. She has a strong track record of supporting clients and organizations in creating impact, culture shifts, and leadership development. Her unique ability to identify common patterns while generating new awareness and reinvention leaves clients with the ability to make stronger choices, clearer decisions, and powerful steps toward their desired outcomes. Elena offers in-depth and customized executive programs for high performers who are at the top of their respective fields, from CEOs of leading businesses to founders, entrepreneurs, policy-focused individuals, professional athletes, pretty cool, and entertainers and more. Partnering with Elena, these clients have created and achieved a professional and personal impact in the world they once perceived unattainable. As a former leader and trainer from Accomplishment Coaching and Chief Core Guide Facilitator, Elena continues to expand her work with teams across the world. Elena hosts the podcast Collective Corner. So welcome, Elena, to the Get Diversifused podcast. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to have you. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and how you came to found the C-Suite Collective and become a master certified coach and certified Dare to Lead facilitator. That's pretty cool. That's like a very wide.
Yeah, it's a wide plate there. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, I think the way that I came to found the C-Suite Collective, I've been a coach for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when I transitioned into coaching, I was really curious about the connection between humanity and inclusion and creativity and belonging in spaces. And the first 5 or 6 years of coaching, when I was, becoming, working on my credentials and becoming a coach, I was really using a lot of time to experiment and pilot and get curious about what would make a difference in rooms. And so that led me to launch the C-Suite Collective because I was noticing that I was having a lot of impact one-to-one with clients in a C-Suite collectives or founders or, the C-Suite arenas and founders and entrepreneurs, but I wasn't really having impact from a systemic view. And so I really got curious about what would it be like to work with a collective group of other coaches and facilitators around the world that are excellent and well-trained and also deeply committed to inclusion and belonging. And so 3 years ago, we launched the C-Suite Collective, and we have learned so much, I would say, in 3 years about how to support clients from the inside out to redevelop their culture. And so that's where the C-Suite was born.
Wow. So you actually launched it during COVID. That's actually a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people launched businesses during COVID. So this question, of course, wasn't sent to you previously. It's totally off the top of my head. So sorry for putting you on the spot here. But how the challenges that you saw pre-COVID, how did they change with professionals and C-suite level professionals and executives during COVID or after COVID? I say BC and BC,
literally BC and AC. I love that. Well, I think it was pretty much before COVID. There was a lot of conversations around inclusion and belonging, but they were they were in an older model, for a lack of a better way of describing this. It was in a very traditional way of talking about how we need more diverse voices in the room and how we should care about people in the workforce. So I think that's, for the people in the DEIB industry that have all been pioneers and, served way longer than I have in that industry for the last, 50 to 100 years. I think they'd gotten us to a really good point. And then COVID happened and people got really scared. And then George Floyd happened, and we were all really scared at home alone watching horrible things on TV, and everything with George Floyd. I think there was no way to turn away from it at that point. For if previously you'd been able to avoid conversations like that, you weren't anymore, because you had a front and center seat and you were at home and there wasn't anywhere to escape it. And you couple that with people being afraid for their lives with this disease, right? This virus. And then watching people. I mean, I remember being in New York when it happened, and New York.
Oh, you're in ground zero.
Yeah, exactly. It was the first wave of everything. And so, it was coupled with this, you were watching all of those trailers of bodies that had passed away just pile up. And then you have this happen. And I think it really had a shock wave to wake people up. And I always like to say, I haven't said this in a while, actually, because we're 4 years out. But when it first happened, when I was working with clients, I'd ask them, what is this moment in time waking you up to? Or what are you faced with that you can no longer avoid about yourself and the world? And that question opened up so much during that time for people, those two questions. And really what I saw in the workforce is people were so tired of not having community or not caring, that there really was this wave of, we don't want this to go back to the way it was. So we don't know what we're walking into, but we don't know what, we don't want to go back or they wanted to go back to safety, but they didn't want to go back to their eyes being shut. So that's really what I experienced during COVID.
Nice. And I think you're not alone in that. A lot of people in many organizations experience the same thing in many households, because it did open up their eyes to the inequities in the world. Maybe George Floyd and instances of racism that happened during COVID opened them up even further. But from an organization stand, I think C-suite level executives, and actually all levels really came to realize, oh man, there's employees that don't have computers. There's employees that don't have internet. There's employees that don't have phone service. There's employees that can't work remotely, even though they're all, a lot of their work is done on a computer. And then you have the service workers and just everything that happened and just domino affected. And then you have education, the schools and educational institutions on top of that. That there were the lower income school districts, even though I know we're going off topic here, the lower income school districts took so long to get the funding and get the programs up and running, whereas more richer areas, richer school districts, private schools, I wouldn't say no problem. Of course there were issues, but they didn't have nearly as much of many of the struggles as the lower income school districts across the United States and across the world, actually. It's so it really opened up people's eyes, and I don't say I always say this, but I say it often enough to where I will say I always say it. I'm hopeful that diversity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, all the acronyms that can be added onto it is not a dying field. It's always been around, as you had said, for 100+ years, and to me even longer, because we all want to be treated equally and as humans. There's been if you even go back to the Revolutionary War in the United States, no tax without representation and things like that. Exactly. We want to be included and involved and valued and everything. So yeah, it's not time.
Yeah, no, you listen. And for those people that are scared right now, with the backswing of it, I'm with you. I This is a conversation that is never going to go away because it's a conversation of humanity.
Mhm.
So, when I have people that come to me, organizations that are like, we've got to remove our entire diversity department, DEIB department, or we've got to get rid of our chief diversity officer, or we've got to
Mhm.
release all funding around our initiatives. While that may be true right now, remember that there are so many swings in this movement depending on the world and politics and capitalism. And, there's so many different variables here. And so I always say, like, it's okay. Like, I've chosen to be on this train for life.
Yep.
And some of us don't have a choice to not be on the train for life. Right.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
that's true.
it's a conversation that will always be worthy of humanity and businesses. And
Mhm.
one of the places I'm really focused on in the C-suite collective and why we built it is I am always going to be the person that is like, this is why we should be good people in the world, is we should care about equity and inclusion and belonging in people, right?
Yep.
100%. I don't think anybody, your average person on the street, when you really sit down and have a conversation with them and a cup of coffee, when you get down to it, I don't hear anybody, really bringing such a binary approach like we're hearing in politics. Like I would say
Mhm.
80% of people are probably in the middle. And
Yeah, I
so,
agree.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So to
Mhm.
me, it's never been about the heart-based conversation. That's always important. And I think if we can really tie business ROI and outcomes
Mhm.
to diversity conversations, it's going to change our world. So
I
look,
agree.
I mean, the language that we speak in America that, and the world, but America especially, is capitalism. So while we are reimagining systems and we are doing the work to clean all of the things we've seen happen in our country since it was born,
Mhm.
we can also look at ways that human approach metrics will create more business. So what do I mean by this, right? There's some examples here. Like for instance, several of my clients that I'm working with over the last 3 or 4 years,
Mhm.
as we all like figured out if we want to do hybrid or virtual, or do we want to do a 4-day work week, or do we not want to do that? They decided to really work with their people to condense it to a 4-day work week. And this is just one metric, right? Not the only
Mhm.
one. And then they saw an increase of such
Yeah.
revenue and accountability
Mhm.
because people were using their time more effectively. Now,
Mhm.
this is one company and one data point, but they got excited about that data point. And then they started looking for other data points, like moving people out of seats that weren't in alignment with their values. So, why
Ah,
does that create business ROI? Well, you don't have someone in a seat that isn't happy in a seat.
yeah.
You can move people that do want those seats in, and the people that chose out or were moved out actually had the ability to go find where they wanted to be values aligned then,
Mhm.
right? So that's another metric that we're looking at. And then team building and trust building, which to me goes right into the heart of inclusion and belonging.
Mhm.
When you have teams that trust each other, I promise you they're going to generate more, and they're going to generate
Amazing.
better quality products than you're putting out. And so I think when we center in and we really zero in on the business metrics of this, then it becomes a more grounded conversation instead of a ethics conversation, which is where I think a lot of it gets caught. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean we should
Ethics
leave
and
ethics
race and everything.
behind, right?
Yeah,
But it should be a both and.
I agree. Um, because just to piggyback off what you said, like when teams trust each other, they listen
Mm-hmm.
to each other,
Mm-hmm.
they value each other's input, they are more open to perspectives of other people, and innovation increases. And because of that, productivity increases and employee satisfaction increases. It's a
Mm-hmm.
win-win overall. And it's just when organizations, whatever they want to call it, DEI, employee engagement,
Mm-hmm.
whatever they want to call it, when they embrace those initiatives, or have departments that work on these initiatives, it's going to increase their bottom line, their profitability, because it's going to make sure that they are serving their customer base even better. Because if they hire people that reflect their customer base and people that mesh with their values and their vision and their mission, the chances of the teams working better together increase also, because you're going to have, just all colors of diversity and all different types of perspectives and backgrounds and experiences, no matter what color the person is or where they come from. Everybody, even the people who lived in the same town, the same neighborhood, they've experienced the world differently. Their backgrounds are different. Everything is different. No two people, not even the same household, have the same experience. So it just brings so much more perspectives to everything, and success and customer satisfaction. It's a win-win. So yeah, I can't agree with you more. So I'm trying to bring my document down. It's like stuck. There we go.
Oh, good.
Okay. So when it comes to authenticity and leadership, what role does authenticity play in creating a culture of inclusion? And how can leaders model this behavior?
It's such a nuanced question, because I think a lot of people think of authenticity as that you have to be vulnerable everywhere you go, or you have to overshare, right? There's different versions of what being authentic means out there. And what I want to say is, I think how it impacts cultures is the willingness to which you are able to be seen and show without a mask, or without fear of, or maybe you're still going to be afraid, but the willingness to be in a room and say what you need to say, knowing that it might cause a mess, or it might hurt or cause harm, and there might need to be a repair process, is courageous and needed. And there's not always going to be spaces that you can practice that without some consequences that you're not willing to pay. So I think that when we talk about being authentic in spaces, what I've learned and been educated on in the past couple of years is we got to be really clear about what we mean by that. Because when we go to the world and we say, just be authentic in a room, that doesn't actually address if you're safe to do that, if there's consequences, if there's power dynamics, if you even know how. I think people that are minorities or marginalized people don't even realize the ways that they're not authentic sometimes, because on one hand, it's a superpower and it's gotten you places, and so the superpower is needed. And on another level, there are some things that's cost you to have that superpower. So I think that when you're in this conversation, you really have to start with, why am I being authentic, and what am I hoping to impact, or what is my intention? And then, what are the potential consequences in a room of that? And am I willing to be courageous about that? I think that's where I'd start.
Yeah. I agree. And because it's not that you can't be authentic all the time. It's just the strategy around and the way it's done needs to be thought about, and know who's in the room when you do it. And you brought up marginalized populations when it comes to being authentic, and how they sometimes, or have often, I would say sometimes, have often masked their true selves. And that's so true, because individuals from other countries, they're very self-conscious about their accents. And there's nothing wrong with an accent. Nothing. It brings, it's you, it's part of you. And so it should be embraced. And, or they change their last name to shorten it. A lot of movie stars have done that to fit the norm, or there is no norm, but what has historically been considered the approved way to be,
to fit in Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Like Martin Short, not Martin Short, not Martin Short. Charlie Sheen's dad. I can't remember his name. Martin. His last name was Estevez, but I can't remember his last name. Oh my gosh.
I don't know his. Yeah, I don't know him.
He's actually Spanish. So Emilio Estevez and Charlie Sheen are brothers. Oh, Martin Sheen. There we go. So,
there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So his name is actually Martin, and then a few other names, Estevez. So he's actually Spanish, and so he marched in the march with Cesar Chavez in the 60s, and but to be accepted, like Richie Valens, Ricardo Valenzuela, and stuff, they had to shorten their name because there's a lot of judgments and also trying to fit in, and it still continues today. Maybe not name wise, but in other aspects of people's personalities and identities, they feel like they have to mask to be accepted. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you don't even, sometimes you know you're doing it, and then sometimes you don't, and you're surprised when you learn what it might have been a blind spot, and then choice around that is really where the most beautiful power comes from. Is do you know that you do it, and are you choosing it, and then why are you choosing it? Not from make wrong, but from are you being intentional about your choice?
That's true. One of my recent guests who has a neurodivergent diagnosis, recently diagnosed as being on the autistic spectrum, her whole life, she finally, everything just like clicked. And she said her whole life, she felt like she was acting a part, trying to fit in, and not knowing what was, I wouldn't say what was wrong with her, but why she felt certain ways and struggled with certain things. And because she was misdiagnosed so many times up until her 40s. And we don't often consider our neurodivergent population and how they often feel like they need to not be their authentic selves in order to feel accepted and feel part of the team, and feel heard and not judged, or feel judged, I should say. So
I've really enjoyed in the last 2 years learning more about how to coach within neurodivergence. And I have ADHD, and so that is a form of neurodivergence as well. But I've been really interested in what happens when we don't center something as neurotypical, and then what gifts emerge from that for neurodivergent people. And for the people that have been late diagnosed as well, it is shocking to their systems to have to unravel everything that's happened in their life, and then have conversations around what if, right? If they'd had services or support, or they knew earlier what that would look like. So I think this is all things that are new in the business world. I have a client where we talk about how to support their neurodivergent employee, or team member. And it's a learning curve for a lot of people, because especially if you've never thought about leadership or training or growth or development from that lens, but you've only thought about it like, well, I'm a manager, or I'm a vice president, and I know how to grow leaders, and this is how I'm going to grow it. Like, leadership looks like accountability, and it looks like people being able to own things and drive their own initiatives and project manage to the end of the day. And they've got these markers, which are all very important. And this other lens of the soft skills, now including neurodivergence, has been really beautiful to watch, because leaders are really having to expand how do they say something, or where can they meet people. We talk about like clients meeting each other in the middle of a bridge. If you're on a bridge and you're both on two separate sides, how will you meet in the middle and learn to speak each other's languages and support each other outside of, well, this just doesn't work for me. Those conversations lead to a lot of leaders. My favorite thing to ask my clients is, it sounds like you want a team just like you. So
because that's what they're comfortable with.
Exactly. If you had 10 people just like you, it sounds like you would knock it out of the park. And, we laugh about that for a second, and they're like, yeah, that would be so easy. And then they're like, but also so much would be missed. Like there would be so much of the conversation that is not expansive, and there would be things I've never thought of that are gifts. And so when we really start to have those conversations in a deeper way, leaders start to get curious about what can be created and how to best serve and utilize the people that they're supporting.
Yeah, I mean, that is just so wonderful. Because piggybacking off of that, I like to piggyback. Piggybacking off of that, like if everybody was exactly the same, then like say there was 10 of me, like we all have limitations, and we're good at some things and not very good at other things. So having that diversity is also having the diversity in the skill sets and the knowledge as well. And whatever I may not be very good at, somebody else can fill in that gap who is, and maybe they're not very good at something that I can fill in the gap there. And so we complement each other. And then you use the bridge analogy. And I really like that actually. So as they're coming together, it's like they have to, like say someone has a fear of heights, so they're scared. It can be scary to step out of your comfort zone. You're on solid ground. You know that you're not going to fall. It's not going to hopefully break unless you're on a fault. But it's like, but taking that step onto maybe it's a suspension bridge, is scary, and so, but it's one step at a time, and that's how anything that you're learning, it's one step at a time. Take that step. Okay, take the next step. And DEI is the same way, all the initiatives. And because nobody's perfect, you can have all the wonderful initiatives on paper and in your policies and everything, your strategic plan, but it all doesn't have to be done like put in enforced at the same time. It's all baby steps. Because if you throw all this at your people, even you, all at the same time, expecting everything to be done 100% correct, it's not going to happen. And people are going to get overwhelmed and they're going to be resentful. So you have to slowly include things. And because it's a learning process, people are going to make mistakes, and it's okay for them to make mistakes. But it's how they correct it, like how and if they correct them and move forward, or if they have to get retrained on that. So it's really cool. So thank you. So with those courageous conversations, it's actually I was speaking with a human resources director this morning, and she was saying how one of her VPs, this was a while ago, was very he was brought up complained about a lot, and before she came on as director, and then nothing was ever done with this guy. He would meet with the HR, and nothing would ever happen because he was friends with the CEO. So people were, I guess, too scared to do anything to actually give him consequences. But so when she came on, she heard all these things, these complaints. And so she brought him in. And when she had said that when she walked in the room, he was like, all like relaxed and his feet were on the table. It's like, okay, let's get this done, and he was very honest about everything. He said, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I said that. Because he would belittle people, and expect and only want to hire from Ivy League schools, and not be open to, HACUs, HBCUs, HSIs, and other schools that were not Ivy League, but just as good. And he would belittle people who were, didn't fit that mold. And so, she was able to do something about it, but she went to the CEO and just said, made it about that person's image and how they would be remembered, like the CEOs. And like, this is going to be reflective of you, and so she turned it around and made it, I wouldn't say personal to the CEO, but she opened up the CEO's eyes to like, oh, me not doing something about it says a lot about me.
Mm-hmm.
And about their and also says a lot about the type of people that she likes to have in the higher level positions, and that the lower level people, mid-management on down, doesn't matter how they're treated. So it's, once she got things changed, everything changed. It was just like productivity, as you had said, productivity and employee satisfaction. Her trust and the CEO's trust increased. Just so much positive stuff. So, yeah. So, but it came to having that courageous conversation, like with that CEO.
Yeah, which is never comfortable, right?
Yeah.
I think this is the thing. I'm constantly telling people that if you're waiting to feel comfortable or safe or no fear, then you're probably going to be waiting forever. It's have the fear, and can you walk through it anyway?
So, can you share some examples of how these courageous conversations have transformed organizational culture?
Yeah, I think they've been in the moment. If I'm going to give the best examples, they are moments where there's one organization I was working with that had a team breakdown. And what I mean by that is, there was a lot of silence in the room and people were hesitant to speak up, and a lot of the leaders were speaking, but other team members were not. And so, I just slowed the conversation way down and I said, what's not being said in the room? And really created a container where people could speak up and say what was really on their minds. And there were a couple brave souls that were willing to speak and say all of the things that they'd been holding, or were unwilling to say for fear of retribution or consequences or having it be on their record. And even in that moment when they were speaking up, they were like, look, I'm just so tired of holding this and not saying anything, that even in this moment, I know it might be held against me. So that was a beautiful training moment to say, what do we notice just happened in this room? And what did it take for that person to do that? And then what did you hear? Like, what did the leaders hear from that share? And many people were surprised because they had a completely different view of what was going on in the organization. And this is a very common example. I'm giving you the one that happened, in the last 6 months, but it happens a lot where all of a sudden they're like, whoa, we didn't know you felt that way. And now that it's public and we're all talking about it, there's nowhere to hide. This isn't a one-to-one siloed conversation that people can have their self-defense come up around it. So it was a beautiful moment to be held in that room and say, okay, so here's what's actually happening. Here were all the blind spots. Here's what we made up about it and the stories we made up about it. And what do you all want to do to repair in the moment? What do you need? And there was some repair work that was done. And that really just looks like an apology, a real apology, and then some accountability on action steps and what's next, right? To have this move forward. And the other thing, you said this earlier, and I think it's really wise, is it's not if you mess up, it's when. And so even in that moment, saying like this mess, or I'm not going to call it mess, the uncomfortableness of this conversation is where the gold is. And if you're willing to be in that discomfort, which is the definition of courage, right? You can't be courageous without being vulnerable and walking through fear. So if you're sitting there and you're willing to be uncomfortable, there will be a connection that arises. Because all of a sudden, for that moment in time, everybody in the room felt seen and heard. It wasn't comfortable, but we were all in it together. And there was a breath and an exhale that happened in the room that then everybody in the room could get real. And it was really interesting. Like the energy went down, the tone of their voices went down. You could visibly see shoulders relax. It's like energetically weights had been lifted off of them, yeah. And all from just having a space to be courageous of messing something up and being in it, because I always like to talk about shame through my work with Brene Brown's research. The shame is the thing that enters the space immediately. And then it's not believing shame and actually giving space for shame to show up and then releasing it, as opposed to anything else we do with shame, which is like try to cover it up or defend or tap out, disassociate. Like there's a lot of different ways that we can get out of this in a room. And so I just really think about that moment a lot, because it was a very simple moment, but also very difficult for that team to practice. So that's one example. And then another example I'd give is, we were trying to, again, find these metrics and these ROI measures for inclusion and belonging work in real time. And one of the things an executive team I was working with was using to measure their progress around this was the amount of defensiveness that rises up in a room when feedback is given.
Nobody likes to hear negative things about them.
Nobody likes, well, I wouldn't even say negative. I think some people don't even like to hear positive things. It's all
that's
feedback.
True. That's
feedback
true.
Is like, people act like it's like, the most terrible dish to eat. And I remember thinking as we started our work together, I said, what would it look like in 6 months from now if we know that we've grown in the area of normalizing feedback or a feedback culture? And they came up with the metric. They said we would have less defense in the room and we would be able to stay in the conversation quicker and longer. Super tangible, right? To measure. And so we said, okay, so how does it go now? And we went through each person and they described what happens the moment shame comes up and they get defensive. And then sure enough, 6 months later, we went around the room and we measured that based on the work we'd done around trust and shame and courageous conversations. And wouldn't you know it, the metric was a lot lower. Everybody was like able to drop into a conversation like 3 times quicker than they were before. And that to me was a very powerful moment of them recognizing their growth, but also being able to see that these things can be tangible and measured.
And as you were talking, I was thinking, so a lot of consultants, when they go and do assessments and stuff, they part of their menu, I guess, of services, I guess you can say, can be the conversations, facilitated conversations. Those are very, very important. But part of it, the assessing, is also the surveys, the anonymous surveys and all. So in your experience, and I hope I hope my answer, I'm in line with what you're going to say, like thinking, in your experience, what has been, or what is more effective when it comes to leaders actually doing something, acting on the results that they receive from these assessments? Is it when they get data from surveys, anonymous surveys? Or is it when they are involved in these facilitated uncomfortable conversations and have an opportunity to hear?
Yeah, I think it's both. I would highlight the utilization of both, because in the anonymous survey, I think I don't remember the data. We have one of our org psychologists on our team who is incredible, gave me a stat once, and I can't remember it right now, but it's something like most people are only like 75% honest, even on an anonymous survey anyway. Right. So it's like I don't know the exact percentage there, but it's the idea that if you make sure it's anonymous, you're going to get a little bit more honest feedback, and you're still not going to get all the honest feedback. Right.
Of course, there's still that fear of repercussions and it being traced back to them, even if it's from a third party consultant.
Exactly. So I think with the anonymous feedback, it's really good to figure out where the themes are arising. And really pull out the themes. So you can sit there and you can go through and look at what are the top 5 or 10 things as a organization or a team that we need to really look at and address, that were said in many different ways, that we can say, okay, this is actually in our space here. They're going to be pretty clear. They're going to arise pretty quickly when you see. And when I'm looking at this data with a team, usually what arises to the front is relationship to feedback. Like how does feedback go in your culture? The level of trust on a team is very easy to see in the data. And then what's actually working well? Like that's another place to look, like where are you excelling or exceeding your expectations, to also notice what is moving the boat forward. Yeah. Right. And then, but those direct conversations as the second item that you pulled out, I think they have more impact long term. Because at the end of the day, if you're reading a report about feedback, I don't know. I mean, I'll speak for myself, but when I get one on me, like I'll take it in, but it's still a data point on a piece of paper, or on a survey. So for me, it's really going to be understanding what is really resonating for me off of the feedback and what I want to move forward to change or address as a gap. When I'm in a real-time messy conversation and I mess up, I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I remember my shame. I remember looking at the person across from me telling me how they felt. And I remember cleaning it up. To me, I just think that the learning and the growth goes a lot further. So I also encourage teams not to hide behind data, not to come outside from the feedback and actually have a real conversation and normalize feedback culture in real time, as opposed to waiting for the next survey or the next review or the next 360. What would it look like to have your culture be normalized, that you get on the spot feedback and you are willing to address it in real time?
I like that. Speaking of teams, one thing when I led teams, I loved doing those personality like survey things, like for the whole team, and me too, so we could see our strengths and our I wouldn't say weaknesses, but things that we were good at, and how we could complement each other, and how we can work best with each other, and just share it with the whole team. And the teams actually really like that. And so that's a sort of like another, I would say, a type of survey, but it's another assessment that teams can do within the organization. And there's a lot of free ones out there.
There's so many.
Yeah.
If you don't use any, please do use some.
Yes. I used to use, I think it was 16 personalities or something like that, which was pretty cool. But there's a lot of free ones out there. Strengths Finder, you have
Strengths Finder, GC Index, Leadership Circle Profile, DISC, Myers. I mean, my favorite of mine recently has been Human Design, which has been interesting to see science correlated with spiritual work. That's been interesting.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. We took it into an organization that is traditionally, they were a tech organization and traditionally not open to conversations like that. And it really changed the way that they work together. Yeah.
And because to stereotype, and I apologize to any tech people, my husband's in tech, but just to stereotype. Most tech, or a lot of tech people, I wouldn't say most, are more in, I wouldn't say unsocial, but they're into their work and they're always on their computers. So there's not as much time to socialize as in other industries and careers, because they're work is on the laptop. Focused. And so they tend to be sometimes, I wouldn't say socially awkward, but less social. And so it's, when it comes to tech startups, it's very important. They don't even think about it half the time, about how their team makeup of the company really does need to take DEI initiatives into play, because even though there may not, they're conversing over the computer, they're still communicating and with each other. There's still that interaction. It may not be always in person, but it's it's a form of interaction that they need to be aware of how people, their coworkers from other cultures may interpret something, misinterpret something, I should say, because in writing it's so easy to misinterpret, even people from the same culture. I mean, but it's these initiatives are just very important, and a lot of startups don't think about that when they get funding, and they're starting to grow and all, and they start in mass hiring, and DEI is not usually on their mind in that time, and it should be on their mind from the get-go. So once they start hiring their first few people outside of the founders. So
yeah, beautiful points.
Thank you. So what are some practical steps that leaders can take to build inclusive cultures from the ground up, and how can these steps be sustained over time?
I love this question because this is what we actually did with the C-Suite Collective.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I decided if I was going to build a company and I was going to launch it, I was going to try to do it with inclusion and belonging in mind at the forefront. I hadn't seen any organizations, at least to my knowledge, that had that front and center in the development of a company and a startup from the very beginning. So we've had a really great time figuring out what that might look like. And from it emerged a 3-phase approach, or a model that don't actually go in order, and you do a lot of the phases over and over again when it comes to culture. But what we identified is that the first step is to get really real. And so we practiced getting real all the time, even in the beginning stages of setting up, like how we were going to take on clients, or how we were going to serve organizations, or how we were going to bring in trainings. And I think getting real also included saying the things that are in our space about each other, and not holding back, and trusting that we could say what we needed to say, and that however it landed, we would be able to repair and clean up. So I think that's the first thing we focused on. And then the next step is really belonging to yourself. And so we've done a lot of work around not only owning your own identity and markers and your own sense of belonging, but looking at where you still leave yourself behind, or where you're compromising your values, or where you yourself are not owning your gifts. And so we did, the collective did a lot of work in that arena. And then what we saw in the third phase is that a culture of belonging naturally emerges from that place. When you've done so much work tending to getting real and belonging to self, and add in their values for the organization, personal values for yourself. And I'm not talking about like, yeah, we have some values on a website. No, operationalizing the values and making sure the values are present through everything you're choosing to do and everything you're choosing to build. It really created a beautiful container and beginning of a culture. And so it's still an experiment, but what I've been acknowledged for from other people, but also have continued to see, is that our community is solid, and the community was solid before business was solid. So that was also new, right? Like and for a while I was like, wait a minute, did I just build a community model and we're just a community, or we're not really a business? I thought that for a while. And that's not true. What actually happened is that the community needed to gel, and the culture needed to gel first to be able to serve our clients at the level that we want, and to be able to support others in doing the same. And so it took a little bit. I would say we probably worked on culture and community while building the ship, right?
Which I think it should happen that way, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was it was a luxury and a privilege of time. I understand that a lot of startups and companies don't often have that, but we had the ability to go slow. And I want to say we probably worked on our culture and community for a good 1.5 years, if not 2 years. And it doesn't mean we didn't launch and that we didn't run business while we were doing it, but we were really focused on it. And I think that what we're seeing now, and the ability to support clients in this, is exponentially further than it would have been if we'd started with business first.
I agree. As you were talking, I was an analogy popped in my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, get out, I'm trying to listen to Elena. Because you were talking about some great stuff. But I think of a startup, if we make the analogy, because it's like your baby,
Yeah, I
and
felt that way.
so it's like raising a baby, you have to start teaching them right from wrong from the beginning. Don't touch that, don't do that, you're going to get hurt.
That's true.
And they test you just like your employees are going to test you. And
Yep.
not that your employees are your children, but it's just but a startup is like your baby. You have to incorporate those rules and policies and procedures from the beginning, and nothing's perfect from the beginning, just like you're raising a child. There's no handbook, everything's different. So you change things and adjust as you go, and assess, reassess, revise, and improve, and it's that's wonderful that the C-suite collective did that.
Yeah,
so cool.
It's been a good experiment for sure.
It sounds like it's been a successful experiment.
I mean, I think so. Yeah. We're only in year 3, and the first year we broke even, the second year we made a profit. And this year we're on track to probably still make a little bit of a profit given an election year, but I don't know. Other founders tell me those are pretty good stats for the first 3 years of a company. So
yeah, no, definitely. Because a lot of startups don't make profit for a couple years.
Exactly.
They're usually in the red. Some of them are in the red or some break even their first year, but so it's that's very awesome. So congrats.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So we had talked a little bit about trust when it comes to teams and organizations. So when it comes to rebuilding trust, like when trust has been broken and stuff, what advice do you have for leaders looking to rebuild trust within their teams after a period of disconnection or mistrust?
Oh, there's a lot that I could say on this one. I think the very first thing I would say is please adjust your expectations of how fast this is going to go. Trust is broken in an instant, and trust takes a long time to rebuild. So it's not that, avoid breaking trust at all costs. You will mess up. You will have trust breakdowns. And please remember to just be patient with yourselves and your teams to rebuild slowly over time. It's something that's going to take focus, energy, commitment, authenticity, transparency, all of those things, but really it's going to take time. So I think that leaders often forget that when we're trying to repair quickly or we're trying to move forward, and also when we're hurt, like at the end of the day, the leaders I work with, they take it, just as you were saying in your example before, they take it really personal as well because they care about their people. And it's so I think that sometimes leaders rush to get over that feeling of, oh my gosh, how could you not know that I care about you and I value you? And they spin a little bit as opposed to just being in the hurt for a little bit. So I think that's step one. And then I think step number 2 is accountability. Nothing changes if you apologize and then you continue to do the same behavior over and over. And sometimes that's hard because it could be automatic patterns. It could be a disagreement of values or direction that you want to go. It could be just a straight up misalignment anymore. Like, I got to go. I don't belong here anymore. Oftentimes there are people, that don't like each other. And on one hand, I don't think you have to like everybody you work with. And that's kind of cool to play with too, is you may not like each other, but do you trust each other? Like, that's a cool conversation to be in. And if you don't, what do you need to trust each other to do the work that you're here to do? So I think those are all areas to get curious in, and to just remember that it really is going to be about an apology, time, and then accountability around people seeing that you are actually practicing what you've preached.
And thank you for bringing the human component into the answer, because humans are complicated.
Yeah.
And it does take time, just like with anything that any progress, it takes time.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
gaining muscle, losing weight, and
Mhm.
it takes time. And everybody has different personalities, everybody has different um lengths of time they might hold a grudge.
Mhm. Mhm.
So whether they know it or not, but it's that effort, and
Mhm.
and knowing that you made a mistake, and as you said, being accountable and trying to correct it going forward, and
Mhm.
continuing to improve and all, and not just making a mistake and ignoring it and continuing to make the mistake. It's because that's not valuing anybody, that's not listening to anybody, that's not respecting anyone, if
Mhm.
you keep doing the same thing over and over again and making no apologies or any uh, attempt to correct, yourself. So
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
it even comes down to pronoun use. Like there's some pronouns that may be more difficult for older generations to get used to, and that's okay, but make the effort, and
Mm.
the more you do it, and don't make it about you. When you make a mistake,
Yeah.
it's it'll slowly get better. You'll slowly
Mm.
improve, and it'll become like pronoun use will be like the back of your hand. It'll get better. But yeah, so let's go into some key takeaways. So because I know we're at time, so I want to be as
Oh, good.
respectful
Oh,
of your
good.
time as possible. I know we're a little over, but let's
Okay.
talk about some key takeaways. So, listeners, Elena and I talked about inclusion and as a foundation, and we talked about creating a sense of belonging that can be the cornerstone of every effective conversation in the workplace, fostering trust and collaboration. We talked about courageous leadership and explore the importance of leaders embracing authenticity and values-driven dialogue to build stronger, more inclusive teams. We talked about building inclusive cultures and some strategies for cultivating an inclusive culture from the ground up, where every team member feels valued and heard. We talked about rebuilding trust and discussed some approaches to rebuilding trust within teams and organizations, especially after periods of change or disruption, which will happen. Know they're going to happen, but
Mhm.
try to use some of the approaches that Elena mentioned. And we discussed the role of authentic leadership and the significance leaders bring when they bring their whole selves to work, setting the tone for a culture of openness and inclusion. Is there any other key takeaways, Elena, that you'd like to mention to our listeners that I may have not that I may have missed?
Oh, you got it. You got it. You had
Awesome,
all the
cool,
good ones. Yeah.
total grooviness. Thank you. All right, so let's go into some possible next steps, listeners. As you know, I always like to leave you with some things to help improve yourself. So after listening to this a podcast, things that you can do, your call to action. So
Mm.
self-reflection. Encourage leaders to reflect on their own practices around inclusion and belonging. Where are the gaps and how can they be addressed?
Mm.
Implement courageous conversations. Start incorporating courageous conversations into regular team meetings to foster open dialogue and address underlying issues. Now, it's important to state that if you feel it's a safe space and if you feel you have the authority and personality
Mhm.
to facilitate these meetings, because there will be personality clashes.
Yep.
Build inclusive spaces. Identify one area in your organization that could benefit from more inclusive practices and take steps to implement the change. Seek leadership coaching. Consider working with a leadership coach like Elena Armijo to develop the skills needed to lead authentically and inclusively. And continuous learning. Never stop learning. Life is learning, people.
It's
Engage in
so true.
ongoing.
It's
Engage
so
in
true.
ongoing. It is. engage in ongoing learning about DEI practices, and stay committed to evolving your approach to inclusion and belonging. Do you have any other next steps for our listeners, Elena?
I think do as much reading as you can. I love the resources and the readings that are out there right now. There's a new book called What It Takes to Heal by Prentice Hemphill. And I really, really like this book because it speaks to the lens of healing and community. And to me, community and culture in organizations are side by side. So I would definitely check out that book. And then, the greats like Origin by Jennifer Raff, Case, The Origins of Our Discontents, Isabel Wilkerson. I think White Fragility obviously is one that was very popular about 4 or 5 years ago. And just get curious. The goal isn't to learn everything to be perfect and get it right. It's to be more aware and try and practice and, see what you can grow and learn in your mindset around other people.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. So awesome. Those are all great next steps. And just to go back, the What It Takes to Heal, that was Prentice Hemphill?
Yep. Prentice Hemphill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. I had not heard of that one. So I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, it's a good one. I'm pretty much almost finished with it and I really, really like it. It's very good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Listeners, I will have those books on our resources slide that Elena just mentioned, in addition to some other resources for you in case you want to check some even a more PD calls to action out. So Elena, if any of our listeners want to get a hold of you, like whether they want to utilize your coaching services or they want you on their podcast or they want you as a speaker at one of their events, how can they get a hold of you?
You can come to my personal website. So coachingwithelena@gmail.com. So it's pretty simple. coachingwithelena@gmail.com.
Cool. And your website's the same, Coaching with Elena?
Or elenaarmijo.com.
Elena Armijo. All right. And can they connect with you on LinkedIn?
You can connect on LinkedIn. You can connect on Instagram. You can, probably shouldn't say my phone number is everywhere, but it is.
Mine too.
Right. I am easily accessible.
No prank calling, Elena.
Exactly. I might have to rethink the phone number when being out there.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Elena. Listeners, I will have Elena's contact information on one of the last slides as well as in the summary of our podcast today.
Beautiful.
So thank you so much, Elena, for being our guest speaker today. It was wonderful talking with you.
Thank you.
You do some great work. So
thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you. So listeners, remember our episodes launch every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or I think it's Eastern Daylight Time now, soon to be Eastern Standard Time again once we hit daylight savings, but 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll just keep it easy. And so listen to our next episode next Thursday. I believe it's August 29th. So it's already getting close to the end of August here. So with that, listeners, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and remember, stay diversifused. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Want to be a guest speaker on the Get Diversifused podcast? I'm on the lookout for guests, so if you're passionate about DEI and would like to share your unique insights, experiences, or success stories, I want to hear from you. If you're a fellow podcaster who's passionate about DEI, let's swap the mic and amplify each other's voices. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out to me at Andrea@diversifuse.com and I'll send you the link to our guest interest form. Hope to hear from you soon. Remember, stay diversifused. Now go out there and make a difference. And as always, for more strategies on building inclusive workplaces and communities, check out Diversifuse. We're here to guide you on your DEI journey. Make sure to visit our website at diversifuse.com and follow us on social media for the latest happenings, blog posts, tips, and events.